Good morning and welcome to the Johnson Space Center for today's post-landing news conference to wrap up the STS-78 mission. With us this morning are Ron Dittemore, the Space Shuttle Program Integration Manager, and Jeff Bantle, today's Entry Flight Director. And we'll start off with Ron.
Thanks. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here this morning, especially after completing such a successful mission as STS-78. Just to recap, it was the 20th flight of Columbia on OV-102, and it was our longest flight for a shuttle to date. It was almost 17 full days, where we investigated the effects of microgravity on protein crystal growth. We looked at the production of advanced semiconductor materials and alloys. We studied human physiology, where we were looking at the effects of weightlessness on muscle fiber, also the bone response to space flight, and we studied the human lung under stress. And all these investigations were performed in an outstanding manner. It also gave us a chance to showcase a capability that we have been developing for the last little bit, and that's two-way video conferencing. This is something that we plan to use a great deal in the future, and for this flight it worked very well. In fact, we had planned to fly it as a demonstration, and in the course of the mission, because of some of the events that happened on our experiments, we used it in an active role in our operations, uplinking some video describing to the crew exactly how to do some in-flight maintenance. So that will play a major role in our future, and I think that offers some good pluses for us in the future. This mission also allowed us to do the most extensive use of telescience that we have conducted so far, where we have controlled from the ground these experiments during the crew's sleep. There were 4 European sites involved and 4 domestic sites involved that were monitoring and offering insight and integrating with the Marshall Space Flight Center on the commanding that needed to be conducted. And then to top it all off, as we came in this morning, we had our first flight of the pilot point of view camera, where I think we got a good idea what it looks like to approach the Kennedy Space Center. Unfortunately, we had an overcast deck at 21,000 feet, so perhaps we didn't get as striking a view as we expect to get in the future. But even then, as we approached the runway looking out the front windows, I think it's a significant view for us to have kind of a look over the shoulder from the pilot's point of view. If you add all that up, we think it's a great mission, 17 full days. We're very pleased the way the vehicle performed and the way the ground teams functioned, and especially the way the flight crew performed.
Jeff?
I don't have much to add on the mission. I agree with Ron. It was a super mission, a great ending to a mission. Deorbit prep went very well today. We did have a couple of items we worked. The first one was around the time we configured our computers for Ops 3 and got them ready for entry, we did see one occurrence of an IOTERM B error. Other than that, we don't know much about it. It was so momentary that we weren't able to determine exactly what it is. We did do a BFS dump the BFS software after we landed just to take a look at that. But other than that, the computers performed very well throughout the entire deorbit prep and entry. Also notice we cold soak our radiators and go to topping evap control with the topping fess, and that worked pretty well. And after we came out of the cold soak and everything, on the high loads for about an hour, we did have a freeze up of the fess. This was a high load freeze up as compared to the topper in the other case. So we had prepared for that, even though it was a little bit unexpected. We had prepared for that and had a procedure in basically flushing the high load. We actually flushed both the high load and the topper. Signatures were indicative of ice in the high load, and after that cleared and the duct temperatures came back up, which was about 20 or 30 minutes before deorbit, and we saw good control on the high load, we got very comfortable with the cooling situation. Another indication we had, FCS channel 3 was on the rudder. It was channel 3. We had a position feedback problem. It looked like a power problem. It was intermittent. That was one of 4 channels there, so we had 3 other good channels on that surface. And then we had a small little deucer problem on APU-1. Its speed deucer was intermittent during entry, but that's extremely minor. But all in all, I think you saw a very good landing. I think the flight control team was very well prepared for anything that might come up. We were talking about several more failures beyond any of this, so we were very well prepared for what might happen. And I think the approach and run to runway 33 was very nice. I think it turned out being a 3 or 4 knot tailwind, and Tom's landing looked great. So I glanced over at pilot point of view camera a couple of times also, and thought it was great. Now you have an idea of what we're looking at when we talk about breaking out of cloud deck and picking up the runway. We like to do that at 8,000 feet, no lower than, and I believe this deck was somewhere around 16,000 feet. That's all I have.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll take questions here in Houston. Before going around to the other NASA centers, please state your name and affiliation. We'll start with Mark Carreau.
Mark Carreau of the Houston Chronicle. For Jeff Bannell, was the weather call even close today? Was it pretty easy to make?
Yeah, you know, we worked it a little bit, and we're looking at low ceilings, but coming down the last hour before the burn, things looked good. It was an improving kind of trend, so it wasn't. The only thing I wanted to know is if we had another rev of weather. We're a little bit concerned about the winds picking up, and a couple of the items we were working, if we wanted another rev to work those. But the items that we were working worked very well, and we were able to clean up the fests and have good cooling and get real comfortable and solid with the vehicle, and the weather was pretty much there. So it was a good improving trend today, so I don't think it was too difficult for the weather.
And I have a second question. I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Dittemore, I'll try that. Last night, there was a brief period of time where they were concerned about the refrigerator that held some of the medical specimens, and it sounded like they got it cleared up before the temperature got too high or anything like that. But was there anything that would indicate that they may have lost any specimens, or did that all look as though it came out in good shape?
Are you aware of that, Jeff? I'm not even aware of that, Mark.
Yeah, and Mark, when I checked the logs coming in today, I don't remember any problem with the freezers. So, and from talking to the payloads today, I know that they were, to my knowledge, getting all the samples out, and we're expecting to get all the samples. So, don't know of any problem.
And for Mr. Dittemore, how long do you expect this duration record to stand? The shuttle will probably fly some longer flights sometime soon. Can you give us a little perspective on what the next notch up would be?
Well, I fully anticipate that now that we've gone 17 days and established that standard, there will be others in the wings that would desire to do the same. Our next long duration flight is scheduled to be next March, STS-78. And we'll just have to see what the requirements are and whether or not it's justified to go any longer than the 16 days. If you looked at this particular mission, the way the power was managed, the consumables were managed, we could have gone probably close to 20 days.
Mark, anything else? Okay, we'll go down to the Kennedy Space Center now for questions.
Bill Horowitz, CBS News. A question for Ron Dittemore. Could you give us a little update? I realize there's probably not much to update us on, but how things are going in the SRB world. I was wondering if there are any new candidates have emerged, and when do you expect the decision? I know there's a teleconference Tuesday, I guess, to talk about all this, but can you just give us some kind of framework on when you guys are going to do something?
Well, you're right, Bill, that not much has happened by way of tagging up with everybody since we last talked to you on Wednesday. It is #1 on our agenda as we meet this coming week. We are planning to talk with the team on Tuesday, and that Tuesday meeting is really a status meeting on where we are and making sure that the paths that we have identified, that everybody is marching down those paths in the right way, and that we have got every base covered. We intend to meet further on later in the week in a more substantive manner and talk more about the details and the results of the analysis. But that's our schedule so far.
Well, I guess what I was looking for, is there any kind of informal target where you want to be able to make a decision? Because obviously if you had to roll Atlantis off the pad, the sooner you do that, you're minimizing the impact downstream. So, I mean, do you expect something by the end of the week, or is that just up in the air right now?
Well, it is a little bit up in the air because we're not trying to push this to any decision in an early manner. We want the folks to have enough time to clearly analyze the data, make sure we understand it, and our first milestone, if you want to say it's a milestone, is to get together on Friday and discuss the analyses. And there may be some follow-on analyses that we have to do. So we're not trying to drive schedule or anything like that. We're really trying to take our time and understand what the indications are and what it means to us.
for Jeff Mantle. I'm just curious on the GPC thing. That was GPC-2, right? So that was, the error was on the machine that you guys had loaded the BFS software in, is that right? And was there any problem with the BFS all the way down through landing?
The error that we got was an IOTerm B error message. That can be, theoretically, that it's the BFS reporting an IOTerm problem, but it's, we never saw, or I don't believe we saw, and they have to go back and look at the data, the IOTerm B on the BFS go low. It could have been, I guess, a high indication on one of the past machines. Any of those would be an IOTerm B problem. But from what we could tell, the performance of the BFS, the GPC-2, was fine in all the past GPCs as far as that's concerned. There was one momentary error message, and we don't see an indication. There's a lot of speculation as what it could be, but it could have something to do with the BFS slot. It theoretically could be a past machine's IOTerm B going high, which would be unexpected. All we know is we had some IOTerm B indication somewhere that lasted about a second. And other than that, until we look at the data and maybe look at the dump data, I don't know that we'll know any more for a little while.
This is Sue Butler for the Associated Press, also for Mr. Dittmore. And follow up to Bill Howard's question on possible rollback. Playing into all this will be Hurricane Bertha, apparently, from what the weather people tell us, which may hit Central Florida in around Thursday. Would it not be prudent to roll back anyway and look at those boosters in safety rather than sit on the pad and then have to roll back possibly, which would delay? And how much would you be delayed? Till mid-August, till you could get off the pad?
Well, Sue, you mentioned Hurricane Bertha. Certainly that's going to have to play into what we think about what we're going to do, not only on the pad, but with the rest of our assets in Florida. And we're just going to have to keep a close eye on what's happening with that hurricane, where it's going, etc. As far as schedule goes, you know, you can speculate a lot on what we might do, and depending on the outcome of this analysis, probably in the worst case, if we did have to roll back, and if you wanted to speculate in that manner, and de-integrate the boosters, then you're talking mid to late August on being ready again, if that's the type of information you're looking for.
This is Phil on Earth News for Jeff. These couple things you mentioned, the FES, the APU, the GPCs, are these just minor issues, nits, or any of them were any concern? I heard a little bit of the air to ground where Blaine was talking with them about the FES, and it sounded like you were about to hold off for an orbit if you couldn't get the FES flushed. Were these just minor nits, or did any of these cause you any concern?
Well, the APU speed sensor and even the IOTerm B, I think I'd call those fairly small items. The FES, we wanted to make sure we had a good topper and especially a good high load. That's our major piece of cooling equipment for entry, is a high load, and we would be prepared to wave off a rev if we hadn't felt the high load was good, and that's the path we had chosen. Especially important on this flight with all the science samples coming back. We really didn't want to do any power downs unless we really had to. We never really want to do that, but it could impact science some if you had to do that. So we wanted to make sure we had a good FES and take our time and flush that well, make sure the ice was gone, and make sure it was controlling. And as far as the FCS channel, I mean, that's a critical piece of equipment, but we do have 4 channels. This was one of 4 for the rudder. So, but you know, we take those things seriously and make sure the team's well prepared as they were today. And we're usually talking about the next failure that can really hurt us, and that's what we talked about in all these cases, just to make sure we had chosen a good path and a very safe and recoverable path, dependent upon what the next failure might be.
This is Irene Brown with UPI for Mr. Dittemore. I understand that Shannon's Lucid has been informed about the situation with the boosters, and I wanted to know if you knew what types of issues is your Russia team working now with regarding a possible delay? Is there any sort of backup plans being drawn up, or are you starting to schedule things with the Mir 22 launch and the Progress resupply flight, which I understand might be delayed?
Well, certainly is premature at this point to start making plans along those lines. That's not to say that we don't have those thoughts in the back of our mind as far as what backup plans might we have to start talking about if we go through these analyses on these on what we saw in the boosters and it doesn't come out in a favorable way. But certainly those conversations will be continuing with our Russian friends. There's lots of different options that we might use as far as Shannon is concerned, but all of those have not come to fruition at this point.
Though? I'm sorry, have the plan's been initiated? Are you starting to look at some of these options? And if so, can you elaborate on what some of the options might be?
Well, let me say, you know, we've been looking at the boosters now for a little over a week, and we have not initiated any other plans as far as what we do with going to the mirror. What are we talking about in schedule? We haven't initiated anything along those lines. All I'm saying is that we have thought about what we might have to do. We haven't put any of those plans in motion. We know there are opportunities. If the shuttle were delayed a little bit, we can go in mid to late August if we understood the problem, if it caused such a delay. If not, then there are other opportunities where Shannon could be returned on Russian spacecraft. So there's lots of opportunities and options to talk about, and we have not gotten to the point where we have been very serious about making those discussions happen. We need a little bit more time, and I really think we need this week to talk to our technical folks and understand the analysis before we go much farther.
This is Todd Halverson of Florida Today for Ron Dittemore. I'm a little bit curious as to your discussions with the Russians. I'm wondering what exactly you've told them about this situation and what you've told Shannon Lucid and how you told her.
Well, you've got me on that one, Todd, because I'm not aware that we have spoken directly to the Russians on this matter, so I'm going to punt on that one. And I don't know exactly what we have talked to Shannon about either, specifically.
Okay, and I was also wondering whether you could tell us if you have any data back yet on how many of the joints had heat effect and how many had so-called wet sooting.
No, we have not got any more information than what you were briefed about last Wednesday.
And I was wondering, in a general sense, if you could tell us how the new water-based adhesive was qualified for flight.
Todd, I don't have enough information on that to respond at this time.
Pete Galtieri with the West Kentucky News for Ron also. Not to jump the gun and place the blame on that new glue that you used over there, okay, you don't know how it was qualified right now, but is there anything that you can tell us on who ordered the change? Was it like the EPA or NASA Safety? Do you know that?
Well, the change in the process and the material came about as a result of environmental concerns. And the old material, we needed to change because the old material had some environmental concerns associated with it. As far as the process that was involved in certification and qualification, that process is well understood. I just don't have those details. If you need those details, we can get those to you.
This is Sue Butler again. I'd like to follow up on that. You started out with an asbestos putty. This one is water-based. Do I understand correctly that this is now the second or the third type of putty you are using, and you might have to investigate yet another chemical product?
Well, it seems to me that the questions we're getting are very premature on what we may be doing in the future. The work at hand right now is to understand the indications that we saw in the boosters for STS-78. Beyond that is a lot of speculation. And so what we need to do is go off and conduct this analysis, and we'll know a lot more this week to answer those questions that you're putting to me right now.
And we understand that that was it from KSC. Any follow-ups here, Mark?
Mark Carreau from Houston Chronicle for Mr. Dittemore. I think I gleaned all this from the questions in Florida, but just to be sure, at the moment, still probably the leading suspect or the issue you're looking at is this adhesive in the insulation seams. Is that still kind of what you're looking at as opposed to some new candidate or some growing family?
Well, it would seem to be an obvious conclusion if you just looked at the data that we've never seen this before. We had a process change, we used this new adhesive, and now we see this. What we want to be very careful about is we don't jump to that conclusion. Maybe there's something else that we're trying to be told and we're not seeing it. So we want to be very careful and not jump to that first conclusion. That's why I think we need more time to really understand the problem before we say what it is or not.
And just to follow on that, could you sort of characterize the kind of analysis that's going on right now? Even just sort of in a cursory summary way, the kinds of things that you have to do to answer these questions in terms of record searches or chemical analysis, physical observation, and so forth.
They're looking at the material records, they're looking at the process as far as putting the hardware together, and they're doing chemical analyses on the material itself. And that analysis will help to determine whether this sooting occurred early in flight or occurred late. And you know, you can glean from the chemical analysis if it occurred late that it happened post-SRB separation. And that would lead you down a path in one direction that would be less severe than if it happened early and was there during the first stage. So those chemical analysis will help us determine exactly when we think this occurred. And that's what the real information that we're looking at. Now again, we're trying not to jump to any conclusions, so we want the folks to do that analysis, come to the table, and then let us review it.
Okay, that'll wrap it up for here. Several programming notes.